So you resigned from the State Department 10 days after Israel began its bombing campaign in Gaza. How difficult was that decision?
If nothing I can say or do is going to make any difference, if it is just that the barn doors are open and all you can do is stand out of the way, then what is the point in being here and in being complicit?
How do you respond to critics on both the left and the right in America who argue that unconditional support for Israel is necessary for stability and security in the region?
That is just an absurd assertion when you look at the fact that even right now, Israel is involved not only in bombing the Palestinian people, but also bombing Yemen, bombing Lebanon, bombing Syria.
Hello and welcome to The Muslim Viewpoint, a new video podcast series powered by the nonprofit national media platform American Muslim Today. I'm your host, Rifat Malik. Today's guest is Josh Paul, former senior official at the U.S. Department of State, who gained national recognition after becoming the first official to resign in protest against the Biden administration's military support for Israel's retaliation in Gaza, following the October the 7th attack in 2023. With over 11 years in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, Paul was highly regarded in his role as Director of Congressional and Public Affairs, overseeing U.S. defense diplomacy, arms transfers, and security assistance. He was awarded the 2023 Joe A. Calloway Award for Civic Courage in recognition of his decision to resign. I spoke to him earlier. Josh Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. Real honor to be here.
So you resigned from the State Department 10 days after Israel began its bombing campaign in Gaza. How difficult was that decision going back, obviously, 2023? Can you tell us what was the aftermath like for you personally and professionally?
So it was a difficult decision in some ways. I'd been at the State Department for over a decade. I found the work engaging and fulfilling. At the same time, I also felt, having worked in that field of security assistance and arms transfers, that I had a responsibility not just to be a cog in the machine, but to try and raise the issues of concern of human rights, try to mitigate some of the outcomes of some of America's very often difficult and dangerous defense relationships with other countries. And up until that point, had always had the ability to have at least some incremental impact. I think, that's all that any of us in government can hope for. The US government is a massive enterprise, and you can't expect to shift it on a dime. But there's always the space for debate and for change that is in the right direction. That is what was taken away by the US government in those first days of Israel's attacks on Gaza. Any space for debate, any space for raising concerns about humanity, about human rights, about American complicity in war crimes. And that, for me, was the major turning point, was the point at which I said, I can't be a part of this, because I recognize the US isn't always going to get it right. But if nothing I can say or do is going to make any difference, if it is just that the barn doors are open and all you can do is stand out of the way, then what is the point in being here and in being complicit in these atrocities? And indeed, it was 10 days into the conflict that I left, or at least into this phase of the conflict, I should say. But of course, that was also 3,500 Palestinian lives into the conflict at a time when Israel was dropping bombs, thousands of bombs on a daily basis onto civilian homes, onto civilian infrastructure. And so it was very clear what was happening at that point. And I felt that, it was, in that sense, a much easier decision. And then to the second part of your question, I think, in terms of impact. So first of all, I didn't expect that I would be still working on this specific issue a year and a half later. I don't think anyone thought that the bombs would still be dropping a year and a half later. And, it's just appalling that we're still dealing with these very same issues and still seeing children killed on a daily basis, still seeing reporters killed, UN aid workers, women, innocent men, that this has gone on for so long. I do think that the conversation in America has changed over the course of those years, and in part because people have been speaking up. There have been over a dozen people who've resigned from the US government over this, and who have, I think, really had an impact in shifting the conversation, along with, of course, the thousands of college students who have raised their voices around the country, and the millions of Americans who have joined them in doing so.
Yeah. And as you say, following your resignation, the death toll did rise, to many tens of thousands. And there were reports, again, you touched on this, that within the administration, there was dissatisfaction. 11, 12 of colleagues also resigned, but a lot didn't publicly protest, I think fearing retaliation. Can you give us an idea of how fraught the internal discussions were within the administration at that time, and perhaps subsequently from what you know from colleagues? Were there channels for these concerns to be expressed, or were they being ignored?
So at the time that I left, my sense was that the broad consensus, and certainly everyone that I spoke to within the State Department, agreed to some extent or other that what we were doing was wrong. That American weapons, yes, were clearly being used in violation of international law, that this was not in America's interest. But there were, at that time, certainly few who were willing to speak out because they were afraid for their jobs, for their careers. There are, I think, a lot of incentives we all face, whether we're in government or in the private sector, to limit or to curtail what we say because of the potential implications of doing so. But that's not to say that people don't within government and understand this, particularly those who've worked on the region and understand the conflict itself. Over the months that followed, there was an upswell. There were, of course, reports of town halls being held by the Secretary of State and by heads of other US government agencies, in which there were many complaints raised. There were cables, Dissent channel cables within the State Department, in fact, more than had ever been sent on any issue that were raised about the US role in Gaza. So I think it is fair to say there was a significant amount of dissent and concern. The problem was that you had a president of the United States and a secretary of state who weren't interested, who didn't want to have a policy discussion, who didn't want to debate these questions. And so none of these complaints led to any significant shifts. And I think that that certainly remains the case today under the Trump administration, except now with the added broader attacks on both the State Department and our foreign assistance, and on the civil service writ large.
Yeah. Of course, the Democrats lost last November's presidential election. We know that many voters were disaffected with the Biden-Harris ticket because of Gaza, with some voting third party and some even supporting Trump. Do you believe Gaza was a factor or a significant factor in the election outcome?
Yes, I think there's no question that Gaza was an important factor in the election outcome. And actually, we've seen polling on this. There was an IMEU YouGov poll a couple of months ago that showed that for voters who voted for Biden in 2020 and then did not vote for Harris in 2024, the primary reason was Gaza. That was the number one reason why there was that drop-off. I think it goes broader than that. Obviously, you can look at certain states, and Michigan as an example, where there is a clear impact of Gaza itself. But I think for millions of American voters, they saw Kamala Harris's unwillingness to separate herself from what I think is, whatever voters' position is on Israel or on Palestine, an unconscionable loss of life facilitated by America, facilitated by our tax dollars. And they saw a disconnect in Harris. They saw an unwillingness to listen to the voter base, an unwillingness to shift, an inflexibility, a lack of human connection. And so I think regardless of the actual issue of Gaza, that was very much an indication that built to a lack of faith in a Harris administration and that contributed to her loss.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that survey and other reports as well. But what I did notice that in the post-election sort of post-mortems that we had, there was very little mention of Gaza. Occasionally there will be references, perhaps in Michigan, like you said, because of its concentration of Arab and Muslim voters. But it was in, as you say, it was in most of the swing states that Gaza was considered a primary reason. But did you feel that the media has not been reporting that? And there's been, obviously, the focus has been on the economy. But I don't feel that, I mean, a lot of people don't feel that Gaza has had the recognition for the election outcome that perhaps it should have had.
So I think the problem there, in part, is not necessarily as much with the media analysis as it is with the Democratic Party itself. And that you have a party establishment, I think, that is being driven by some, very specific resource interests and self-interest that is essentially, covering its ears and closing its eyes and saying, no, it's not that, it's not that. It's that we were too far left, or it was, about the economy, or whatever it might be. Whereas I think the evidence is very much the contrary. And I think that should be a significant concern, both for the Democratic Party and for Americans, because the answer is that this is an important issue, and it's not only an important issue in the context of, the Palestinian humanity, but also, of course, now in the civil rights space, or increasingly even in the civil rights space. And if you have a Democratic Party that says it cares about civil rights, says it cares about human rights, says it cares about a rules-based international order, but is willing to carve out and turn a blind eye to the most pressing instance and challenge to all of those that we face in this era, then you do not have a Democratic Party that is going to be able to rebuild credibility with a large amount of the American people. And at the same time, you are also conceding a really important space to those who are using Palestine and the issue of support for Palestine as a testing ground for an authoritarian agenda that, once it is fine-tuned here, will be rolled out to many more parts of America and American interests. So I think that is a real challenge.
You said that the US support for Israel's military action, or the continued support in Gaza, is contrary to American values, and you've described Palestine as a struggle for the soul of America. Can you expand on this? In what ways do you think that America's failure towards Palestine defines it?
So I think that, let's be clear, first of all, the most harm that is being done here, of course, is to the Palestinian people themselves. But America, at least theoretically, has stood on a number of values, such as self-determination and freedom, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, of course, and has interests around the world. And what the US has been doing in the context of its unconditional military support to Israel has been contrary both to those values and to those interests. When we look at the harm America has done to its credibility around the world, to its ability to argue for human rights, for democratization. When we look at the harm that is being done to the rules-based international order, the system of rules that has been built up for over a century, and particularly since World War II, to prevent us from falling back into the chaos of might makes right. That is an order that is being swept away in great part under our own leadership. We are the ones sweeping it away, attacking the legitimacy of the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, ignoring international law when it comes to arms transfers to a country that is committing war crimes, and of course limiting our own democracy, trying to limit our own free speech to suppress criticism of that policy and of that partner. So all of this, I think, runs very deeply contrary to what is actually in the American interest, which of course is a free and fair debate amongst the democratic people, and the protection and advancement of a system that ensures that free and fair debate expands to more and more corners of the world.
On that topic, you've argued that America is violating the Leahy Law, which is named after former Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy, and this prohibits providing military assistance to foreign entities suspected of committing gross human rights violations. Do you share the ICC's views that Israel has committed plausible genocide in Gaza and support its issuing of a war crimes arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
So I think the international rules-based order relies on accountability. The fundamental problem here is that if you do not have a system of accountability, it otherwise relies on individual members to enforce it and to abide by it. But without a system of accountability, there is no international rules-based order. So when the ICC says that there is a plausible case of genocide and indicts a prime minister of Israel and a defense minister, now former defense minister, on the basis of crimes against humanity and war crimes, I think it is vital that we let that process play out and that we let the judicial process, whether it is the ICC on war crimes and crimes against humanity or the ICJ on the question of genocide, conduct its work. This is how the process is supposed to work. And if there is no space even for a judicial review, for a fair trial, under rules of evidence to move forward, then again, there is no international legal system.
How do you respond to critics on both the left and the right in America who argue that unconditional support for Israel is necessary for stability and security in the region, and Israel is a sole democracy there whose existence is constantly under threat by the forces of neighboring countries?
So let's take each of those parts, starting perhaps with the sole democracy question. As we know, Israel is a country which in recent years has passed a nationality law that makes it very clear that its identity is bound to a religion, and that other religions do not have the same standing, but that, of course, also rules with military force a population roughly equivalent to its own. By definition, that is not a democracy, that is an apartheid state. And I think we need to be very clear about that. Jimmy Carter said it back in 2006, I believe. And in fact, if anything, that apartheid condition has only deepened, where we see Israel, for example, building roads that only Israelis are allowed to go on, but not the Palestinians whose land those roads are being built across, where we see immediate nationalization, immediate statehood for some people who come to the land because of their religious heritage, but a prohibition on even entering the land if you or your parents were born there. It is absurd to call Israel, I think, in those circumstances, a democracy. It is perhaps at best an apartheid system with democratic qualities for those who are on the privileged side of that apartheid. And even there, I think, there are questions that can be raised when you look at Prime Minister Netanyahu's approach to the rule of law within Israel. Beyond that, I think, how can you argue that Israel has been a force for stability in the Middle East? That is just an absurd assertion when you look at the fact that even right now, Israel is involved not only in bombing the Palestinian people, but also bombing Yemen, bombing Lebanon, bombing Syria, continued risk of escalation and war with Iran. There is no stability that is being brought here. There is just the constant insecurity and instability that is tying America down in the region in a way that is contrary to our interests. Even as we speak, there are now 2 American carrier strike groups in the Middle East. There are American fighter jet wings. All of those are there, naval presence as well, because of Israel and its actions. So this is very much a suck on American interests and American resources at a time where, we are already very thinly stretched.
So what concrete steps could the US take to shift its policy towards perhaps a more balanced, cohesive approach to peace in the region? And do you realistically see our historic connection with the state of Israel ever being severed or reimagined in any way?
Yes, I do. But I would say at the start that what we really have here is, to begin with, not a policy problem, it's a political problem. Let me explain what I mean by that. I've, in the last 18 months, talked to a number of members of Congress and of senators who behind closed doors will say what we are doing is wrong. The weapons we are providing to Israel are being used to commit war crimes. But I can't say that publicly, you understand. In government, right, prior to leaving government, again, there was this very clear understanding amongst the policymakers that this is not the right path to be on, that this is likely illegal, that it is harming American interests, but a recognition at the same time that there was no point in speaking up on that because you are either going to, at best, just hit a brick wall or get shut down. And that is because of a very well organized, very well resourced lobbying effort from groups, let's name them, such as AIPAC, such as Christians United for Israel, CUFI, such as Democratic Majority for Israel, DMFI, that have spent a long time, many years, many decades, creating a system of political and economic incentives for those who wish to run for office that essentially is designed to repress and suppress any perspective other than that which is aligned with Prime Minister Netanyahu, his Likud party, and those to the right of it. And so what we need to do is shift those incentives, right? And this is something that we can do. If AIPAC can spend $100 million in an election cycle to get America to act directly against its interests, I do believe that for significantly less investment, we can actually get America to act in its own interest. But that is going to take a professional lobbying effort. That is going to take a commitment of resources. It is going to take a commitment by Americans across the country to go to the ballot and vote based on this issue. That's why Tariq Habash, a Palestinian-American appointee in the Biden administration, who also resigned, and I founded a new policy. This is a new organization that is a professional lobbying organization and a campaign finance organization in parallel that is designed precisely to address this question not of policy, but of politics. Because if we can't shift the politics, you're never going to get to those better policy outcomes.
America's credibility in terms of foreign policy has been questioned for many years now due to its efforts at regime change and support of proxy wars in numerous countries across the globe. You said that our actions often contradict the values that are foundational to the country. How is it damaging to the way America is regarded internationally?
So I think one of the most compelling examples of this comes from another of the people who resigned from the US government in the course of the last 18 months, Anel Sheline. She worked in the US State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, or DRL, as we call it, and was responsible for democratization programming in North Africa. And her testimony when she left government was that she was not able to do her job. Why? Because she would raise questions of democracy, of human rights, with governments in the Maghreb, in North Africa, and essentially would get laughed out of the room. How can you tell us, people would say to her, to focus on democracy, to care about human rights, when you are facilitating a genocide? And so, I think that's a very, very stark example of how, America's role in the world, America's ability to stand up on those issues, whether or not it is directly related to Israel and to Gaza, is impacted. And that creates a void into which other countries and other movements will step. I think it is very clear, for example, that the People's Republic of China would love to operate in a global system in which there aren't these constraints, in which there aren't debates about human rights, in which every country is left to do whatever it wants, so long as it's not upsetting the system. And that is the world that America is walking us into right now, a world that is much more conducive to an approach like that than the one that America has historically at least championed.
Finally, we have had 4 months of the new Trump administration, and it's already initiated highly controversial policy positions with regard to Gaza and the Palestinians. Yeah. Trump's been accused of spurring Israel's violation of the recent ceasefire agreement and of attacking freedoms of Americans at home who are protesting against Israel. How should those voters feel who could not on conscience support the re-election of the Democratic Party because of its direct complicity in arming Israel in Gaza? What should they be thinking now?
So I think the first and most important point to make here is that what this administration's actions, particularly when it comes to students, when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to visas, and surely when it comes to American free speech of citizens very soon, is not an issue that is only about Palestine. It's not an issue that is only about US policy towards the Middle East. It is an issue that all Americans should care about, because once you establish this precedent of being able to shut down and punish free speech, and speech that is, let's be clear, critical of another country. It's not even free speech directed against America per se. That is a precedent that will come for all of America, that will be applied to more and more communities. So I think, for Americans who care about this issue, whether they are Muslim, whether they are Arab American, or whether they are Christian or Jewish or, African American, Hispanic American, whatever they might be, Palestine is now something to care about because it is not just about Palestine. It is about our American rights and our American values. I think that's always been the case for longer than we've recognized it. But I think that is coming into very clear and stark contrast right now. And so I think the thing that we need to be doing, particularly those of us who care about Palestine, is to be ensuring that more Americans understand this. We still have, over a year and a half until the next elections in this country. And then, of course, 2 years beyond that till the next general election. And I think this is a time for coalition building. This is a time to make sure that when we are talking to our co-workers, our friends, our neighbors, who may not have a deep stake in this particular issue, that they nevertheless understand its relevance to everything that they care about. Because when you care about civil rights, when you care about free speech, when you care about America's standing in the world, all of these are implicated by Palestine. And there are a lot of people, including, again, on the Democratic side of the aisle, who would like to segment this off, push it away, and say, yes, all of this matters except for that one thing. And that, I think, would be a disaster. And I think that is the urgent debate that we need to be having, is the explanation of why this matters to everyone. And then, we can look at the elections as they come forward and cast our votes and look at the candidates. But before then, democracy doesn't just happen at the ballot box. Democracy happens every day. And there's a lot of framing and engaging we need to be doing now to tell Americans that this is a question of American democracy.
Josh Paul, I really want to thank you so much for joining us today and for all the work that you've been doing. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining me today on Muslim Viewpoint. If you value our public service journalism, please support American Muslim Today, a 501c3 nonprofit, by following us on social media at American Muslim Today or donating at americanmuslimtoday.com. And before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Rifat Malik.